My name is Kathy Matthews. I am your 2024 High Central MLS Board President, and this is Chuck Garrett, your immediate past president for High Central. Even though we're on Zoom, I want to be sure that we all know that we need to read this antitrust statement. Please don't put any reference to exact dollar amounts or percentages when you're asking questions or in chat. Use coconuts, X and Y, whatever you want, but please don't put any real dollar amounts. Okay, here we are several months after the settlement, and I think we've all kind of gotten into our new normal, and hopefully everybody feels that, you know, with the buyer's rep contract, we're able to provide better service. We're talking to our buyer more, and we're being more transparent as we list the things we do. And we talk to them about how much money we're going to make. And so I hope everybody is, you know, happy with that, good with that, and has a positive mindset moving forward with that.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I think we thought in the beginning when the settlement first happened that there would be a lot more turmoil, but knock on wood, it has been going well. That's what we're hearing largely. But we still wanted to remind you, and I think it's still a good reminder that, you know, to give each other some grace. There could be someone you're working with who is less familiar than you. Maybe you'll get a contract and there's something confusing that they've written, or it doesn't line up with what you think it should be. And so that's okay. I think, you know, maybe you just have to prepare your client sometimes too that, hey, we did have some changes. Give me a minute. Let's have the brokers talk to each other and figure out what's needed. And then just a reminder here too, not to believe everything you read. We're going to dispel, I think, some rumors in this class today. And there certainly are a lot of headlines, crazy big headlines about, you know, doom scrolling kind of media. And so there's no reason to pay attention to all that. Or certainly if you hear something, you could double check it. And we're going to talk about some resources that you have for that. When you see this symbol today in this class, and then even as you move forward, there's oftentimes when your PB or BIC or your legal counsel are going to help you answer some really thorny questions. And we may say that today at the Q&A that follows that, you know, that's a question for your PB, BIC. But some of it is policy, some of it is actual settlement, and we'll talk about that as well. So just a little overview of High Central MLS. As I'm sure you know, Honolulu Board of Realtors was founded in 1922. And in 2007, we split and High Central MLS became a wholly owned for-profit subsidiary, which was very forward-thinking. There are a number of MLSs nationally that are not, that are still coupled with the boards. And they look to us as an example of something that they want to do, something they should have done. And of course, we're blessed by our CEO, Suzanne Young, who is the CEO for both HBR and High Central MLS.
Okay, this is your current board of directors for High Central, and I want you to know just how hard they've worked this past year with extra meetings, focus groups, and I also want you to know that every one of them was just so engaged and looking out for the big picture. There wasn't one person that was there for self-interest. Everybody was just wonderful. It was such a pleasure to banter about all the changes and different things with different ideas and then come to a consensus. So if you see them, please say thank you. Okay, so a little background on our organization. In the late 80s, early 90s, the real estate industry switched. We used to all work for the sellers. Buyers, agents were sub-agents for the seller. So there was no real buyer's agent. And buyers caught on to this and realized this and started lawsuits. And it was done because of the co-op and the sharing of commissions. So that's why there was the sub-agency, because I guess it was thought that if there was not sub-agency, the sharing of commissions would go away, which it didn't. But after all the lawsuits and everything, you know, with buyers saying we want our own representation, you're acting like our agent, you should be our agent. This is what happened. And then now all of us, I'm sure, cannot think about not being a buyer's agent. When we're with our clients, they are our clients. We're not, couldn't even fathom actually having our loyalty lie to the seller. And so I say this because with the changes now that we're going through, maybe down the road, we'll be talking about, oh my goodness, sellers used to set how much I got paid as a buyer's agent. That's crazy. Why wouldn't my buyer have done that? So I mean, we're not there now, but maybe we will be. And maybe when we look back on it, it's going to be crazy too. So I just kind of want to point that out. So as we're moving forward, these may not be the last of the changes that happen to us, that we all just take a deep breath and realize that sometimes change is good.
So we talked about how really paying attention to just the facts of what happened. And so I'm sure in 2019, there was a lawsuit. And then in October 31st of 2023, the judge found for the plaintiffs. And so there were some sellers in this particular case who said that because the listing broker compensated the buyer broker, they artificially inflated commission rates. And so, of course, we didn't agree with that. But nonetheless, they found for the plaintiffs. And then there was a settlement earlier in March of 2024. And so that settlement had certain requirements that we follow now. And so, as is standard, NAR denied any wrongdoing and agreed that offers of compensation would be removed from MLS. We also agreed that written agreements would be used for MLS participants acting for buyers. And so that's the reason Kathy and I are the ones speaking today, is because MLS was directed in the settlement. We did hear from the Department of Justice in November. They weighed in and made some comments about the buyer's rep contract and some other things. But in fact, the court did approve of the settlement on November 26th.
So we had some options as a board, which is, why our directors had extra meetings and we had these focus groups. We had the option of opting into the settlement or not. If we chose to opt into the settlement, that meant that our MLS and our brokers and our brokerages were covered under the big umbrella of NAR and their legal protections. If we did not, then we were on our own if we got sued as an MLS or individuals. But by opting in, we had to abide by the terms of the settlement. And, we did have several focus groups with PBs and BICs all coming together and discussing this. We did reach out and it was great discussions. But we did unanimously vote to opt into the settlement. And so with opting into the settlement, the changes, and we're going to repeat these several times because some people still are not quite getting it. So we don't mean to be repetitive by accident. We're doing it purposely. But offers of compensation have to be removed from MLS everywhere in MLS. It cannot be in pictures, in remarks, in links. And that includes commercial properties and rental properties. But commercial and rental do not need to have the buyer's rep contract. We require the written buyer agreements. You cannot filter listings based on compensation, which is, harder now because it's not in MLS, so you can't filter it that way. But you can't, collect data, ask people how much, is the seller offering, and then show your properties based on that. And as a buyer's agent, you cannot advertise your services as free unless they actually are free and you're not receiving compensation of any type from any source. And then other MLS changes that we had, which we also unanimously approved, is the mandatory taking of this class that you are in right now. Congratulations. And violations of the new MLS rules will result in fines and more education, which we'll talk about in depth later.
Okay, it's time for our first attendee poll. So the question is, under the new rules, which of the following are acceptable ways to communicate compensation in MLS? And you have 5 choices. We need that Jeopardy music. So thanks for answering this poll. We wait until we get about 85%. %, have answered.
People are still clicking it, so we'll give it just another moment or two.
Okay. So 80% of you got it right when you said none of the above. But if you made any other choice, and certainly all of the above, absolutely wrong. We're going to, as Kathy said, repeat ourselves. And so we're going to go a little deeper into why those are wrong. Coming right up. Okay. So compensation offers must be moved off of MLS. Can't be an agent or public remarks. Can't be a link or any kind of media. You see, we have these photos of 2 pineapples and 3 coconuts because I'm sure it was a joke, but some people talked about maybe they would wink, wink, show the compensation with a picture of 2 pineapples on the kitchen counter, etc. And so no, 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 cannot be in MLS. I kind of liken this to the way we all know if you shoot a video of the property and there's some information about yourself, your name, your company, if it's branded, cannot put that in MLS. So the videographer knows to give you a branded version and an unbranded version. So on your own website, on your own YouTube channel, you can show the branded version, but you may not upload the branded version into MLS. This is the same. We'll talk about the ways you can communicate compensation, but MLS is not a place for that. And then just a reminder, this is for sellers who predetermine that they are going to offer a specific compensation, because as you know, many sellers can choose the option on the listing contract that says, I'm open to negotiate. And in that case, there's nothing to communicate except that seller's open to negotiation.
I've been seeing more of that. I think that's becoming more popular. In the beginning, I think when that was checked, people were afraid, buyers were afraid, agents were afraid that meant they really didn't want to include payment to a buyer's broker. But I think now a lot of people are just checking that and just seeing the contract when it comes in, and reviewing it that way. I think,
I agree. You remember there were 3 options originally in the listing contract. Now there are just 2. Either you're communicating it or you're saying negotiate, and both are valid. But I think you're right, Kathy. The negotiate kind of leaves it open, like the seller knows the buyer has signed an agreement and already has compensation in mind. It's a little cleaner that way, perhaps. So where you can discuss compensation, obviously the buyer's rep contract, the exclusive right to sell, as we just mentioned, the purchase contract, the cooperating broker separate agreement, if you are using it. As you should know, the cooperating broker's separate agreement is not valid for the new listing contract, where broker-to-broker compensation is not addressed. But as of the time of this class, there could still be some legacy listings, we call it. If somebody has a listing that was done on a exclusive right to sell before August 12th, then it may indicate that cooperating brokers apply, and so you would still use that agreement. But I would say if you ever see that, if you see a co-op coming to you with an offer, make sure you're not putting it in C4 and also signing a cooperating broker's separate agreement. That would be two commitments to pay the same fee. And so be careful when you see that form. It should only be coming to you when there's a legacy listing. And it should be quite infrequent. You may also put compensation, of course, on your fact sheet, in an email, in calls and text, in social media. As Kathy said, as we move more towards the seller opting to just say, I'm negotiating, I'm not seeing a lot of that either, where people are broadcasting what their offer of compensation is, which is probably easier as well to just put in C4 what the buyer has already agreed to in the buyer's rep contract. But you may, if you have a practice of having an amount that you share, you could put it on your broker's website showing only your listings. So a brokerage may advertise compensation of their own listings on their own website. If you were to put a link to that website in MLS, however, it can't go directly to that property if that property listing shows the compensation. So as Kathy reminds me, it should be 2 clicks. So 1 click to your website and a 2nd click to the listing. Again, I think this is actually not as common as we might have thought.
Okay, so I think we're getting used to these terms, but in the beginning, when the settlement came out, they were using the term concession, and people were getting it confused with compensation. And so, I mean, a concession could be compensation, but most normally these terms, concession equals a credit such as a credit for the roof, a credit for the buy down, a credit to fix the flooring, and compensation equals commission. So we just had put that in because the terms were getting confused in the beginning, especially in the beginning. Okay, and also there was a lot of concern when we were not offering the compensation on MLS and it was needing to be asked for, that we would have a problem financing. Our buyers would have a problem financing because the money that the seller was giving to pay the agent would be above the IPC percentage. And so the interested party contribution is somebody from outside, not the buyer, giving money, a gift letter, credit from the lender, just anybody giving money that is not the buyer. And so Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac came down and said, nope, the money that the seller is using to pay the buyer's agent is not considered an IPC as long as it is customary in your marketplace that the seller pays the buyer's agent. And so the same with the VA, as we all should know, veterans were specifically not allowed to pay their own agents. And of course, when this all happened, that made that very difficult. And so the VA was very quick before Fannie and Freddie to remove that from their rules. Appraisers. Okay, so now appraisers are having more challenges because they're not seeing in MLS what the amount was that the seller was paying to the buyer's broker. And of course, the commission can be, tens of thousands of dollars. And that does make a difference in an appraiser doing comps because, if one seller paid a buyer's broker and another did not, that makes the prices, the actual bottom line price for those properties different. So it's very important that we communicate with appraisers. I mean, it's always been important, but it's even more important now. We need them. Our buyers need them. We need, correct appraisals, accurate appraisals. So, please do get back with them right away, and you can be transparent and open with an appraiser. You do not need to hide a concession or hide anything. You should be transparent with them.
Yeah, and you're allowed to. Like, some people might have thought, can I talk about compensation after this lawsuit? And so you certainly can with the appraiser.
Right. And then in the bottom left-hand corner here, which Chuck usually talks about here, is FAQ number 104. And this FAQ, this answer comes directly from Facts.Realtor, which is a tremendous source of information. And you can go and look up all kinds of questions and get good answers that the NAR legal team has put together for us. And so we'll talk about that more.
Yeah, we'll show you a link to that a little bit later. And even yesterday, I had a question and I asked Kathy by email, and then I was driving somewhere and I thought, I forgot to look at the FAQs. I wonder if the answer was there. And by the time I got where I was meant to be, Kathy had checked the FAQs and said there was a tiny little bit of comment about that. But even we forget. but it's definitely a great resource.
Okay, so the next thing is lenders. We had a meeting when all this started, escrow, lenders, and High Central leadership. We had a meeting so that we could all understand each other's new challenges and talk about practices and how we could work together and, relay information to our participants about how to work with each other. And one of the things we had heard that lenders are requiring a copy of the buyer's rep contract. And we were a little like, why do they need that? That's our business. That's not their business. But then all of a sudden the light bulb came on during this meeting. Lenders said, well, we absolutely need that. That is a monetary obligation that the buyer has committed to. And they have to have the funds to pay that. They did, however, say that all the buyer need do is write something down to them, an email or a letter that said, I will not accept or I will not enter a contract that where the seller is not paying my buyer's broker. And then the lender does not need to take that obligation to make sure that the buyer has that money in reserves to pay, because a lot of times our buyers are using all their capital to, make the purchase. And then it also allows them at the end, if perhaps the contract in C4 says the seller will pay the buyer's brokerage firm Y, but the buyer's rep contract says they'll pay Z, which is more than Y, and there's that difference there, the lender is going to look at that and say, okay, your agent needs to be paid this. And so either they're going to pay you or you're going to amend your buyer's rep contract. But, that's also, it's a good thing, for us as well.
This is one of the, I think, light bulb moments for me. We were like 3 months into this and this came up. And I think this is the perfect conversation you have with the buyer, which is, yes, you're signing this buyer's rep contract, but you don't have to accept any offer that includes you having to pay part of this. And so you may tell the lender, I don't have that plan, or maybe you find the perfect property and you will want to pay part of it, but it really brings it all together, I think. Okay, written buyer agreements required now when working with the buyer. The term written buyer agreement is used by NAR because it's different, of course, in different jurisdictions and states. In Hawaii, you could have your company could create their own written buyer agreement, but HAR has created the buyer's representation contract, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then, as you know, NAR required on August 17th, we adopted it on August 12th, that a participant is required to have a written buyer agreement when you're working with a buyer, and there are two triggers: working with a buyer and touring a home. And so let's look at those a little closer. I think we all know what working with a buyer means. You have some agency, you've identified potential properties, you're talking to them perhaps about how to find a lender, arranging to tour a property, negotiating on behalf of the property. All of those means you're working with the buyer. The second trigger is touring a home. And so obviously that means physically showing a property, but it could also mean previewing a property on behalf of the buyer, and it could mean a live virtual tour in some capacity. The buyer doesn't have to be physically present. So those are the two triggers requiring a written buyer agreement. There are a couple of terms that are also required. That agreement must conspicuously disclose the amount or rate of compensation. And it must also be objectively ascertainable and not open-ended. So we're going to talk about that a little further. But there must be a term that prohibits me, from receiving any compensation beyond what's in the agreement. So if you have agreed to 2 pineapples is going to be your payment from the buyer in your buyer's rep contract, you can't take a bonus, you can't have other terms come in, you can't accept more than that, certainly without amending the buyer's agreement. And then there's conspicuous statement that must be there that says commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. All of these terms are covered by the HAR form. Obviously, they took care of that for us. And so there is a question, FAQ 87, it says, in the buyer agreement, can buyers and buyer brokers agree to a range of compensation? So the answer to that is no. That was that objectively ascertainable and not open-ended. So it says, for example, you can't say buyer broker compensation shall be whatever amount the seller is offering. That's absolutely cannot be written in there. This is the whole point, that we've moved it away from the seller. And it can't say between X and Y. So you can't have a range. Now, of course, it's challenging. That used to be okay in the former use of the buyer's rep contract, but not anymore. That has to be a specific amount, ascertainable. We all know that there are times when HAR might ask for some documents, or HBR, sorry, might ask for the listing contract or some other things if there's a question about whether you followed the MLS rules or any kind of conflict with another broker. And Kathy has indicated that the lender is somebody who may look for a copy of that buyer rep contract, but really between the lender and maybe HBR, High Central MLS, those are probably the only two people that really are going to be asking for or should be asking for that. The seller's agent has no reason to see this agreement because that's all negotiated in the contract. And so it's fine. You don't see, the buyer doesn't see the listing agreement, and so the seller doesn't see the buyer's agreement. But you may find that there could be times when MLS may ask for this. So if somebody reports you as not using a buyer's rep contract, probably not that common, but it could happen. A consumer could be the one reporting. Or as I said, if there's some kind of conflict, HBR, High Central MLS, is going to want to see everything. Let me see the buyer's rep contract. Let's see the purchase contract. And that will be part of some sort of a settlement that might happen as they help you resolve some issue. If you are not an ABR, we strongly suggest you consider getting your ABR designation or certainly taking the class because it goes much deeper into all of the proper uses and strategies regarding the buyer's rep contract. Things like shorter timeframes, easy and quick cancellation. It's a much different document than the listing contract that is usually, 12 months, et cetera, right? You can have a buyer's rep contract that's 1 day, 2 days. You could have a buyer's rep contract that is the length of someone's visit. They're here for a week and they're going to be looking at property. A lot of folks use a shorter time period up front while you each get to know each other because you're making obligations to that buyer as well. And then maybe after a short period, everybody's happy and you make it a longer contract. And then the ABR class also will help you explore property-specific or area-specific agreements. I might say, Kathy, I'd like you to help me in Eva Beach, and I would like somebody else to help me in Kailua. Not that common, but does happen. I think somebody said, well, that seems unfair. And I said, well, it happens a lot that people, there is a percentage of people who will use more than one realtor. In this case, they actually have to articulate that to you. You're going to have to sign for that. And the ABR class also covers buyer-buyer dual agency, which is another type of agency we might not think about or talk about that much. But if I have two buyers for the same condominium high-rise, then what happens? Which one do I show first? Or how do I demonstrate that I'm treating both parties equally? So a great class to consider. You should find the HBR class will be available through visiting HBR. And the NAR class, these dates here we have are talk about CE and other NAR classes free through December 31st. You may be seeing this after that time frame, but I'm sure both organizations will continue to offer this class. And whether it's free or not, highly recommend. And I just hear people rave about these classes.
There's also other classes. Our Honolulu Board of Realtors truly gives us a wealth of support, and we just need to realize it's there and then take advantage of it. There are classes about the purchase contract, listing, how to establish market value, different terms you can put in the contract, about financing. There's just a lot of a lot of classes that can just help you be better at your craft. So please do take advantage of them. And, next year, maybe that's a resolution that we all take more education.
Yeah, and any changes with that ABR that's offered locally, you can find on the HBR calendar. Whatever's happening in 2025 will all be shown there. That QR code will get you to that calendar.
And then our standard forms committee has worked exceedingly hard. They have revised the forms twice now. They met for hours, they had 8-hour meetings into the night, going back and forth with how to change our forms, led by Patrick O'Neill. And so if you see anybody that's on that committee, truly say thank you. Yeah, that was pretty crazy, right, for them.
Yeah.
Oh, here we are, the fun stuff now.
The fun stuff.
So with having to have these mandatory changes and having MLS be the entity that is responsible for enforcement, we have come up with a new compliance and fine structure. And again, we did focus groups with PBs and BICs to get more input than just the 15 of us on the High Central board. We also had the HBR board involved. And so what we came up with is for violating putting the offer of compensation in MLS, or the violating working with a buyer without a written buyer's agreement when one was required, your first violation is a $100 fine and mandatory education. For both of them, the second violation is a $300 fine and mandatory education. The third violation, however, differs. If you put an offer of compensation on MLS for a third time, you will get a $500 fine and you will be suspended from MLS for 6 months. That is a huge penalty. To violate that 3 times, really takes some doing. You would think that after you do it once or twice and you get hit with you have to write the check, but more than that, you have to sit through more education, that you would remember not to. We had some people suggesting the fine be in the thousands of the dollars. It was, this is, I want everybody to understand, this is really important because this is the result of a lawsuit. This is now the law for us. And if we are seen as not enforcing this, we could lose our protections from NAR's legal umbrella. We could be out of the settlement. We could be sued. So it's like 1 or 2 or 10 people could make a difference for the other 6,700. So the penalties may be severe, but the consequences of the violations and us being seen as not taking it seriously are also severe.
Yeah, Kathy, it's true. Across the country, all MLSs are the ones who were decided, this is an MLS rule now. This is an MLS. We must be monitoring compliance. And so if we were found guilty of not monitoring this, we could be in trouble, as Kathy suggests. But the hope is that nobody ever gets there. We don't need the $100 and $300 fines as an income scenario. We hope nobody violates any of these rules, but they're here to protect us and to ensure that we are and can demonstrate that we're monitoring these new rules.
And everybody's been doing really good. Dean has said that they're getting almost 0 violations. And through the end of the year, all you get is a phone call and a reminder. And at the first of the year is when these new fines take effect. And then for the category for the written buyer's agreement, the third violation is a $500 fine and mandatory education. And one different thing about these 2 new categories, 5 and 6, are that they do not reset at the first of the year. The other violations that we have do reset. Like if you forget to, change something from active to active continue to show or from pending to sold, and you don't do it within the 4 days, you can get a fine. And then if you do it a second time, you get another fine a little higher. But at the first of the year, you're back to 0 and you're back to that lower fine. These do not reset. They are with you forever. You're always a third violation.
I like what you said at the beginning, Kathy, where today we can't imagine not having a buyer's representation. And so there's going to come a point where people are like, what do you want? You can't put compensation in MLS, right? Why would anybody even think that? And indeed, I think the mindset also is going to be, why would the seller be determining what the buyer's rep is paid, right? So hopefully these will just become history quickly and nobody has to worry about these fines. There's a couple of timelines we just follow through. As you know, we removed compensation from MLS and started requiring the written buyer agreement on August 12th. And December 31st is the deadline to complete this training. Otherwise, there'll be a suspension on January 1st. And so some of you could be watching this by video if that happened to you. And then, as Kathy just mentioned, the new fines for compliance take effect on 1/1/25. So up until that date, in the first few months of this, it's just been MLS notifying you that you violated one of the rules without having to have a fine. This is the slide we wanted to talk about early on, which is facts.realtor is where you will find the FAQs. And as Kathy has said, this is so well organized. Anytime you have a question, this is the first place you should go. It's the first place we go. You can also look at the MLS rules and regulations, which are right on your High Central MLS dashboard. Those are fully updated as well. And then regarding the forms, again, just a reminder that Hawaii Realtors can help you with questions about forms. And I would say pay attention to the emails from them, not only about when new forms are released, but you can give them feedback too. There's typically a feedback period. Almost always lately, some things have had to move quickly and the feedback periods are short. But anyway, pay attention to the communication from Hawaii Realtors. It's time for our second poll. It says, can you be suspended from the MLS for violating the NAR settlement requirements? Let's find out how you do.
Yeah. Looking in pretty quick. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
This is the best by far.
Yeah, thanks for paying attention. 97% said yes, you can be suspended from MLS. If you said no or unsure, that's incorrect. As Kathy just mentioned, it takes 3 violations of offering compensation incorrectly in MLS, but you would have your MLS access suspended for 6 months. Okay, now Kathy has some exciting news.
Yes. So in 2025, we will be onboarding Centric showing service. This will be replacing showing time as our MLS chosen showing service. So you can continue to use showing time. You'll just need to make the arrangements with them separately. But Centric is going to work seamlessly with CentralLock. It's going to be the same login. It's going to just all roll right into each other. And it is a very rich program. Chuck and I went to a presentation about it, actually 2, I think. But it's very user-friendly. It's intuitive. It is just a great program. We had a introduction of it, a little short introduction at GMM, and it got applause. So that was very uplifting and very reassuring. You know, it's going to take some time. We're all just so used to showing time, and it is a great product. But we have a policy, a parity policy as an MLS board that we will not use any type of platform that is owned by a brokerage firm, any of our members, so that we don't give one member advantage over other members.
Yeah.
And so,
And Centric is owned by NAR,
right.
so no conflict
No
there.
conflict there, right?
And same login as CentralLock and the other code you use to get attendance at meetings. It's really a great product. You're going to love it.
Yeah. And Rental Beast is also coming on board, which is going to be just a real big upgrade for all that do property management. One of the very big challenges with property managers not utilizing MLS for their listings is that you have to put it in separately. And your software program, the software program that property managers use, for those of you that don't do property management, will take a listing, take a vacancy, and they'll just shoot it out to 50, 100 different websites. But MLS was not one of them. You had to manually put it into MLS in addition. And it just seemed like a lot of work to a lot of people because the seamless pushing it out resulted in calls and getting your property rented. But then in MLS, we weren't tracking rentals. We had no rich knowledge of what places we're renting for, what areas we're renting quicker than others. And Rental Beast is going to change that. Our platforms that property managers use are going to push this to MLS. It's gonna push it out there into the universe, and you're gonna go, yes, this is my listing, and then it's gonna go into MLS. You can go in and tweak it if you want to and change it around a little, but then it will be there for the next time you rent your property. And this is also going to give us reports, and we're really hoping that this will give us the richness and the completeness that we have with sales so that we can run CMAs, for clients, and that agents that don't do property management could also use this. When you have an investor client, you can just go to Rental Beast and run some nice reports and say, hey, this is what's been happening. This is the information that I have from our MLS system about what you might expect to get as income for this property. And we're really hoping that this is going to be utilized, and we're going to be able to push this and get a rich program and have something really to offer to property managers, which has been lacking.
Yeah, amazing upgrade. Thank you so much, Kathy, for you and all the folks who helped bring that to us.
And then with that, we would really like to thank High Central MLS, all the board members and the staff, and the Honolulu Board of Realtors. We have an amazing support staff and amazing volunteers. If you have not volunteered, please consider it. You get more than you give, and getting to know the staff that runs HBR is really great. They're wonderful people. They work hard, and they work on love too. The camaraderie is good to see. Makes you feel good about your organization. We'd also like to thank HAR and all their hard work in doing the forms and all the leadership and the things that they do for us. And then NAR has worked hard, with 1.5 million members. Some agree with what they've done, some don't, but they have worked hard. So we want to acknowledge that.